Good day. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Yesterday, AJC released its 2024 State of Antisemitism in America report, which assesses and compares Jewish and general population perceptions of and experiences with antisemitism in the United States. The release of the data from surveys conducted in fall of 2024 comes just over 1 year after the atrocities of October 7th. Joining us today to dive into these findings are AJC U.S. Director for Combating Antisemitism, Holly Huffnagel, and National Director of AJC's Center for Education Advocacy, Laura Shaw-Frank. Moderating our conversation today is AJC Managing Director of Policy and Political Affairs, Julie Raymond. After we hear from Holly, Laura, and Julie, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org, questions is plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Julie, floor is yours.
Thank you so much. There's no question that this past year has been a difficult one, not just for American Jews, but for Jewish communities really across the globe. And if you're anything like me, you vacillated between wondering why the media or social media is silent about anti-Semitism, and then being glued to the screen watching the latest, most abhorrent example of anti-Jewish hate. No matter how plugged in you are, it's easy to wonder, how bad is it? This data provides detailed, multifaceted answers to that question. And in a way that I think is really exciting, this data can also drive our advocacy, answering, so what do we do? The data points us towards the most critical issues facing our community and gives us the hard stats to demonstrate the extent of the problem, whether it's to schools, social media platforms, elected officials, or others. Before we bring Laura in, I want to ask Holly a few questions and allow her to share some top lines. Holly, this is now the 6th year that we've conducted this survey, and there are a lot of other surveys out there. Can you start by explaining why it is that AJC does this survey, why this kind of data matters, and what makes our survey unique?
Thank you, Julie, and thank you to everyone for joining this critical conversation today. We do these surveys to understand the impact of anti-Semitism on the American Jewish community in order to better advocate on behalf of that community. And we also do it to understand what the general public knows and where the gaps are so we can fill those gaps. And you mentioned that how the data is a roadmap, for our organization, for our advocacy. It's also necessary and asked for information by the FBI, by members of Congress, by the federal government, by social media companies. And so we deliver this information to them in order for them to do their jobs better as well. And you noted that there was a number of surveys out there. There are on anti-Semitism, that's true. We also see a lot of quick polling, but that's not our report. Our report is invested in rigorous research. We actually contract with a public opinion firm called SSRS to collect this data for us. And so let me just share quickly 3 aspects that really do make this report unique. So the first is that the analysis of American Jews and US adults, it's the first one to be published in the full year since October 7th. No report has come out yet that looks at the entire year comparing these 2 populations since the terrorist attack. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's the largest annual poll of its kind. So the survey of American Jews, we had over 1,700 respondents. And for the general population, we had over 2,000 respondents this year. Last year, we had 1,200. So we had 800 more Americans taking our survey this year. And then the third and last important aspect that really is part of this, unique nature of the report is that it's the first to analyze a half decade's worth of data. From both American Jews and US adults. And we're the only organization to possess these exclusive data sets that really, they track this current multi-year rise of anti-Semitism. And that's what's critical to see 2024 in, that longer, continuous worsening trend of anti-Semitism in America.
So Holly, I know that you have some visual accompaniments for this, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to share them with us. I think the biggest question is, knowing that this survey came out, and we were asking questions of people right after 10/7, how high was that spike? How big was that surge? And how does it resonate really across the populations that we interviewed, including the non-Jewish Americans? Can you unpack it for us?
Of course, and I'm going to share my screen, but I'll just say this before I do. In the 5 years that I've had the privilege and the responsibility of working on this report for AJC, I've never seen numbers like this. We actually had spoken about how 2023 was an outlier last year. That was the outlier. And then what 2024 did is, in some ways, it showed a new normal. And not only did the numbers hold, they actually got worse. And so that's really what we're about to see and what I'm about to show with you, what I'm about to share with you. So one moment as I share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see it. We'll also have some moments of interaction too with the audience. So do pay attention to the question. So, state of anti-Semitism in America in 2024. I always start any presentation, even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, with a quick snapshot of our methodology. Again, this is not a quick poll. This isn't just something that was posted online, people responded. It's a representative sample of American Jews and a representative sample of the US general population. Our full methodology report is on our website, ajc.org. For those who want to read several pages of the deep dive into the field. But just so you know, you can see the 1,700 respondents for American Jews, over 2,000 for the general population. And the period of the survey was 1 year after October 7th was when it launched, going through the end of November for both of the cohorts that we looked at. So this is also really important and allowed us to collect those numbers. I want to share 10 minutes of the slide share, and then we'll move into conversation with my colleague, Dr. Laura Shaw-Frank. These are the three main takeaways. There are many others, but the three ones for us to really sit on today is the first, the impact of October 7th on American Jews. It's undeniable. The second is anti-Semitism in America has reached new levels, and we'll explore what we mean by that. And the third is US adults are more aware about anti-Semitism. They're actually concerned about it too, which is a good finding actually, and they understand the Jewish connection to Israel. So I want to unpack that a little bit more. The first main takeaway: this is the impact of October 7th, and it really puts the numbers behind what so many have been feeling and sharing this past year. We found that over 3/4 of American Jews report feeling less safe as a Jewish person in the United States because of the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th. Over 3/4 as a Jewish person in the US. We found that 90% of American Jews said that anti-Semitism had increased in the last year, and 60% of that group said it had increased a lot just in 1 year. We also know that 70% of American Jews report that their Jewish institutions increased security just since October 7th. Many had already been increasing security, so this was on top, additional security on top of what had already been happening over the last few years. This is our first big finding. Before I introduce our next big finding, I'm actually going to ask Claire to populate a poll for all of you to answer yourself, as if you were taking this survey. So hopefully you can all see it on your screens. And the question is, compared to a year ago, so compared to 1 year ago, do you think Jews in the United States are more secure, about the same, less secure than a year ago, or don't know? We'll give about 10 seconds to answer. Do you feel that Jews in the United States are more secure, about the same, less secure than a year ago, or don't know? All right, Claire, do we have a plurality of responses? Let's see what they. Okay, so 2% said more secure, 15% said about the same as a year ago. 81% of you, 81% said less secure than a year ago. So we'll remember that number. Thank you, Claire. We can take that one down. This is the answer for American Jews across the United States. We had 81%. 73% It's actually quite close. And we're not a representative sample of the Jewish community, but the representative sample, 73% said they felt less safe, that they felt that Jews in the United States were less secure than a year ago. These are very high numbers. And we don't need to look at this in isolation. This is what I mean by those trend data sets that AJC has been collecting. We can see the trend. 73%, it's a very high number, but it might not mean anything if we don't have anything to compare it to. And we can actually track how this has changed over the last several years. Now, we did change the question slightly this year. We took out the word status. Before we had asked about the status of Jews in the US being more secure or less secure. But we can really look at this trend of less secure at the top. 31% said the status of Jews was less secure in 2021, 41% in 2022, 63% in 2023, and the continuing rising. So where 2023 was that outlier, 2024 not only is the new normal, but things are getting worse. This is a very important finding. The second thing that I want us to walk away with is how the levels have changed, how the perceptions have changed, how fears have changed, how behaviors have changed just in the last year. So we're going to go ahead and interact once more with our next poll question. Claire, please. All right. So this is thinking about you personally. In the last 12 months, have you avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might help people identify you as someone who's Jewish? Have you avoided anything that would, hide your Jewish identity, avoiding publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying something that would identify you as Jewish? Yes, no, or don't know in the past year. All right, Claire, we can go ahead and see how people responded. Okay, 46% of you said yes. That almost half of you have avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying something that might identify you as someone who's Jewish. 52% of you said no. It's actually almost quite equal. Thank you. So remember this, we had 46% say yes. We can go ahead and close it. And then this is how the general population responded, and I'm going to actually point you to the number. It's up here where it says 40% in the upper right corner. That was the question that you were just asked. Publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that might help people identify you as someone who's Jewish. So we had 46%, actually quite close to the general American Jewish population. That number was 23% in 2022, and it has jumped. It's almost a 50% increase, jumping 17 percentage points. 31% avoided certain places in this past year out of their concern for their safety or comfort as someone who's Jewish. That number was 16% in 2021. 37% have avoided posting content online. That number was 27% in 2022, earlier in 2022. So we're just looking at a 2-year period. And I wanted to show the 2-year period because you can just see these big increases just in 24 months. And the summation of these behavioral changes is the big number on the left. We found that 56%, so more than half of American Jews, have changed their behavior in at least one of these 3 ways asked about. And for comparison, that number was 46% last year, less than half, 38% the year before. So we're actually seeing more Jews speaking about changing their behavior, hiding their identity, avoiding going places that would identify them as Jewish, or posting content online. Of all the things that we discovered, this one was the most painful for me to see, hiding one's identity, and something that we hope to see those numbers lower in the future. We also learned that 1 in 3 American Jews report being the personal target of anti-Semitism in the past 12 months. We asked about a variety of spaces, whether it be in-person remarks, anti-Semitic remarks, vandalism to their property, a physical attack. But overall, 1 in 3 report being the target of anti-Semitism. And for young Jews between the ages of 18 and 29, this number is 41%. 41% of young Jews have experienced anti-Semitism in the last 12 months. We also surveyed American Jewish college students. We did an oversample of young Jews in order to reach this sample. We worked with Hillel International. They were our partner in having a more robust sampling of young Jewish students in a university setting, including recent students who had just graduated in the past 2 years. 1 in 3 American Jewish students say they've experienced anti-Semitism during their time on campus. And then finally, when we think about levels changing, we can also see levels changing with institutions, with businesses as well. So 23% in 2022 said that their Jewish institutions were the target of anti-Semitism in the past 5 years. That number was 30% and 30% today, 2024. So we're seeing more and more institutions or Jews saying that their institutions have been attacked. 25% of American Jews report that businesses where they live have been the targets of anti-Semitism in the past year, the past 12 months. We asked a similar question last year. We asked about the last 5 years. 19% of American Jews said that local businesses had been attacked by anti-Semitism in the last 5 years. It's 25% for just the past 1 year. And it's 42% for Orthodox Jews in their neighborhoods having businesses attacked. The final category that I want
to jump in here really quickly, just to like peel back a curtain for a second. You talked at the beginning about how there are so many federal agencies and members of Congress who ask for our data. We also, because we have such strong relationships with so many in government, we also ask them, are there questions that you want to know? And this question was one that they actually asked for in the Small Business Administration. They wanted to know, because AJC has a partnership with the Small Business Administration, if local businesses are really feeling anti-Semitism. So not only was this a really shocking figure just on its face, it was also really valuable, not just for AJC, but for the federal government. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Please interrupt anytime in fact, many of our questions have been informed over the years, especially with social media companies, like questions that we need to be asking to help them do their job better. Excellent example of that. And it's an unfortunate reality of an increase in the businesses being attacked. The third and final point is that US adults are more aware and concerned about anti-Semitism and understand the Jewish connection to Israel. And we'll speak about what we mean by that. So what do I mean by more aware? This is actually a positive finding, this awareness. We can't actually work to solve or prevent a problem unless there's an awareness that there even is a problem. And so more than 7 in 10 US adults say that anti-Semitism is a problem in the United States today. 72% said it this year, 74% said it last year, very close. 60% though said it in 2021. So you're seeing that growing awareness that it's a problem. And you're also seeing growing awareness of people saying it's a very serious problem. And you see those jumps for the general population. Again, this is the American public answering this question. So even having these high levels of agreement for the American public is noteworthy. We found that almost 6 in 10, 59% of US adults say that anti-Semitism has increased over the past 5 years. You know, on its own, we might look at 59% and we can compare it to US Jews who 91% say it's increased and 59%. You see this gap. There is still a knowledge gap and an awareness gap. But what's important is how that gap is lowering within the American population. So 2021, 44% said it had increased. 59% say it's increased today. And look at how more and more Americans are saying that it's increased a lot. So there is an awareness change that's happening in our general population, which is important, an important starting point. But this is also a really good finding. For those who said that anti-Semitism had increased, we asked if they were concerned about it. And 9 in 10 of US adults say they're concerned by the increase in anti-Semitism, 88%. Almost 4 in 10 US adults say they've personally seen or witnessed or heard anti-Semitism in the past 12 months, 39%. This number is the same as last year. So in the very least, Americans are still saying they're seeing anti-Semitism, but this number has actually remained unchanged. We do know that Americans who know someone who's Jewish are actually more likely to have witnessed or to have recognized the anti-Semitism that they see. All right, let's move into the Israel piece now, because this is very important. We also know that Americans who follow news about Israel and are more aware have also been able to recognize anti-Semitism more. So you do see some of that connection. But I want to start by saying that they are also very familiar with the fact that denying Israel's right to exist is anti-Semitic. So if we look on the right side, this 85% number first, 85% of US adults say that the statement Israel has no right to exist is anti-Semitic. And American Jews had this, it was the same response for American Jews, 85%. And this is a pretty stable number. The other stable number is the 81% of American Jews who say caring about Israel is important to what being Jewish means to them. This is around the same number we had last year, but it's so important for our work that 8 in 10 American Jews say that caring about Israel is important to their own Jewish identity and their own Jewish practice. And we can see some of the connection here with how the general public responds. So this was we asked a lot about protests, about boycotts, about some of the things that we've been seeing in the U.S. over this past year, especially with the war happening. And in some very good news findings, we found that nearly 8 in 10 U.S. adults say it's an unacceptable form of protest against Israel to boycott American Jewish people, individuals, which has happened. It's unacceptable to boycott Jewish events, which we know has happened, conferences or speaking appearances. 8 in 10 Americans, 77% say it's unacceptable. And the last slide that I wanted to share with you, because we've seen attacks on synagogues, on Jewish day schools, on Israeli businesses, in response to what's happening in the Middle East, the majority of Americans really don't think this is acceptable. And we asked a question, we said, where in the US is it acceptable? And while a large plurality said it's acceptable to both Jews and adults, US adults say it's acceptable to protest in front of the Israeli embassy or an Israeli consulate or a government building, very few, with almost within our margin of error, 5% said it's okay in front of a synagogue, 4%, 6%. So basically what this graphic shows, most Americans do not think it's acceptable to protest Israel in front of these spaces, which is another good finding. The last thing I'm going to end us with is a positive note, Julie, and then I'm going to turn it back to you, is at AJC, we fully believe in a whole of society approach to countering the problem. It's not going to be a responsibility for government or law enforcement alone. It really needs to be on all of us. And we asked this question last year. We had basically the same numbers this year coming back. Where 9 in 10 Americans, Jews, and the general population say that anti-Semitism is everyone's responsibility. It's a societal problem, and everyone should be involved in countering it. So I will stop sharing. I wanted to end on at least one positive note before we have further discussion.
Thanks so much, Holly. And I'll turn to Laura first so I can give you a moment to rest your vocal cords. Laura, Holly talked a little bit about sort of the distinctions between US adults and American Jews, but one of the things that I think our audience would really love to hear about is sort of the digging down into responses that we got from young people. And this year we really overinvested in making sure that we understood the perceptions of anti-Semitism among young people. Can you talk a little bit about what we learned, and then also sort of what do we do with that? How does that data drive our advocacy in academic spaces?
Absolutely. So thank you, Julie. Thank you so much to everyone who's tuned in for this incredibly important presentation. And thank you so much to Holly for that overview of the data that's really just so critical in this moment. So I'm going to take a few minutes to unpack the picture that was painted by the survey of the way Jewish students are feeling, and then I'll talk about what we're asking schools and universities to do. I want to start by saying that our survey showed that American Jews are very concerned about anti-Semitism on campus. 68% of them reported that reports of anti-Semitism on campus were important in thinking about choosing a college for their children. And 51% said it was very important. Only 16% said that it wasn't important. So that's a really important data point for us to have, 68% reporting that is really a critical thing that they think about as they're sending their children off to college. As Holly noted, 35% of American Jews reported experiencing anti-Semitism during their time on campus. That's 1 in 3, which is quite an extraordinarily high number. Our data shows that Jews on campus are feeling a real sense of exclusion and even hostility on campus. And I'll paint that picture for you the way the data paints it. So 48% of American Jewish college students said they had either felt uncomfortable or unsafe because they're Jewish, avoided displaying things that could identify them as Jewish, or avoided expressing views on Israel because of fears of anti-Semitism. That's about half of Jews on campus who are actually feeling uncomfortable or actively changing their behavior based on the atmosphere on campus. And there's good reasons for those feelings and behaviors, because 22% of current or recent college students reported feeling or being excluded from a group or an event on campus because they're Jewish. That's about 1 in 5. And a similar group, 23%, reported the same because of their assumed or actual connection to Israel. So we have a real significant minority of Jews who are being excluded or feeling excluded from campus where their whole place there is to be included because they're Jewish or because they're Zionist. We also asked students and recent students about where anti-Semitism was being promoted on campus or what was fueling a campus learning environment that's hostile to Jews. And again, these statistics are quite staggering. 33%, 1 in 3, reported that student life or student activities had done that, had either promoted anti-Semitism or fueled a campus learning environment that's hostile to Jews. Unbelievable. And we've heard all kinds of stories in that regard, from the dance troupe that won't let Zionists be a part of it, etc. 24%, 1 in 4, reported that class curricula had done that, had advanced anti-Semitism or promoted anti-Semitism or fueled a campus learning environment that's hostile to Jews. And lastly, 32%, again, almost 1 in 3, reported feeling that faculty on campus have promoted anti-Semitism. And I want to take a minute to unpack that statistic because it's a very, very important statistic. The State of Anti-Semitism report that AJC does every year is so impactful because it gives us a picture of the way Jews are feeling in this moment. And feeling is very, very important. It's to access for Americans to understand, for law enforcement, for educators, for all the people in our society to understand. At the same time, we know that feelings vary from person to person and can have different valences to them. What one student might hear a professor saying is anti-Semitic, another student might see as being pushed to consider a viewpoint that differs from their own. We know from many, many, many anecdotes that we have received that there is definitely anti-Semitism being promoted by faculty in university spaces. And we also carry the concerns about interpreting that statistic carefully because we understand the importance of academic freedom. And so while we know universities must address anti-Semitism coming from faculty, and I'll talk about that more in a second, we don't want anyone to think that we're seeking to shut down a professor who's simply critical of policies or actions of the government of the State of Israel, the way they might be critical of policies or actions of any government around the world. No matter what, it's actually truly frightening that nearly a third of Jewish students feel that anti-Semitism is coming from or being promoted by their professors. So what does it mean that Jewish students felt strongly enough to indicate that they thought their instructors, the people tasked with instilling critical thinking, directing spirited debate, inspiring objective inquiry, are the purveyors of anti-Semitism? It's really the responsibility of university leadership to ensure that students are not afraid to go to class or don't have to select out the professors that they know are not going to give them a fair shake or are going to target them. Students should not be confronted with activism in place of education or identity-based harassment. And instructors, for their part, have to ensure that their classrooms are spaces of academic inquiry, where there's respect for multiple viewpoints, where Jewish students are not afraid to express their identities. Educators really have a duty to facilitate a learning environment that doesn't exclude people and where activism, meaning having a particular viewpoint and insisting that students have that viewpoint as well, does not replace education. So quickly, what are we asking universities to do? So AJC Center for Education Advocacy has created an action plan for university administrators that we've shared very widely, and we know from hearing from presidents is being used by many, many universities around the country. It lays out short, medium, and long-term steps for administrators to take to ensure that their campuses will not tolerate anti-Semitism and will be places of belonging and inclusion for Jewish students. By the way, that plan is available on our website, and you can all access it. We are very proud that some of our most urgent asks of universities in the wake of October 7th have been adopted by many universities. Those include clear and updated codes of conduct, rules about protests that have time, place, and manner restrictions built in, et cetera. And that's actually very important because we have a data point there too. Our surveys show that 51% of Jewish college students or recent college students on campuses with encampments, which we know were very common last spring, felt unsafe due to those encampments. But that's not enough. We are also calling upon universities to ensure, as we were talking about above, that faculty and students receive education about Jewish identity and anti-Semitism as part of their required education about diverse groups on campus, that they center efforts to foster viewpoint diversity on campus, including among faculty and among students, because we know how campus echo chambers can create these hostile and toxic environments for Jews and for Jews with connection to Israel. Universities must articulate clear standards for instructors on their responsibilities inside and outside the classroom. And they have to do more to ensure that faculty members and teaching assistants maintain learning environments that are inclusive of students from all backgrounds, including Zionist Jews. And we are working on a number of different agenda items that are going to help universities achieve these goals. And lastly, we want to require education. We want universities to require education for student group advisors and leadership of student groups about anti-Semitism. And we want universities to clarify standards for student groups. If they want to be recognized by the university or college, then they need to be inclusive, not discriminatory, and not creating that hostile environment. I'm turning it back to you, Julie.
Laura, thank you. That was phenomenally illuminating, and really very helpful, I think, for a lot of us who look at campus and sort of scratch our heads. The other place where we have seen an explosion of anti-Semitism and know that there are strong feelings around the anti-Semitism that is experienced is on social media. And that affects young people who are sort of disproportionately present in social media spaces, but it also affects all of us. And Holly, I'd like to turn to you for this one. What did the data tell us about online anti-Semitism? And as our point person for engaging with social media platforms and other tech companies, what are we doing? What is AJC calling for in this really critical moment?
Thank you, Julie. I feel like between campus and social media, we could have our hands full for the next 10 years. We are focused though on, and they're related, by the way. What's happening online often impacts what students are going through on campus. So we're focused in the online anti-Semitism space for several reasons. The first is that online and on social media, that continues to be the place where American Jews experience anti-Semitism the most. So about 7 in 10 Americans, 67%, reported hearing or seeing anti-Semitism online or on social media in the last 12 months. That number jumps to 83% for young American Jews between the ages of 18 and 29. And it's not unrelated that the current rise in anti-Semitism over the last 2 decades parallels the increase of social media use and the ability to spread information, misinformation, anti-Semitism, conspiracies at exponential rates. That there is so many connections there. The second is that online and on social media is also the place where the general public sees it or hears it. So I mentioned earlier that 4 in 10 US adults said that they had seen or heard anti-Semitism in the past year. 70% of them said they saw it online or on social media. So even removing that factor, that's where most Americans, the general population, is being exposed to anti-Semitic content. The third reason why we engage on this issue is that online anti-Semitism and misinformation about Jews and Israel have offline consequences. We have many examples, but one from our data collection is that we know that of the American Jews who said that they had seen or heard anti-Semitism online in the past year, roughly 1 in 5, 20%, said that that online incident made them feel physically threatened, unsafe in real life. The fourth reason that we are engaging, and I just have one more after this, is we know that Americans are now getting their news from social media. It's probably not a surprise. Many of us do get our news even from social media. We found that 52% of US adults say they primarily get their news from social media. That number is 71% for young Americans. So those between that ages of 18 and 29 category, the same category of young Jews who are experiencing anti-Semitism at even a higher rate than the general population, they're primarily getting their news from social media. And this is where it really affects AJC and our issues. This is the fifth reason why we're engaged. Of the US adults who have seen or heard information about the Hamas terrorist attacks against Israel in their social media feeds, over 4 in 10, 43%, say that that information is mostly negative, somewhat or mostly negative about Israel, compared to 32% who say that the information is somewhat or mostly positive. So more people are seeing negative information about Israel. And this is the key issue. The majority of US adults, 77%, acknowledge that the information that they see on social media informs their views on the war. Either a lot, that was 9%, somewhat, 29%, or a little, 40%. But in all, 77% are having their views informed by what they're seeing on social media. So that's the reason, Julie, for why we really need to be in this space. And so let me just end with what AJC is working on. What are we calling for? What are we doing? So for many years now, we've actively been working with major tech and social media companies to really help mitigate these risks. We're trusted partners for many of them, meaning we can report anti-Semitism that we see. We have, we can escalate through special channels of the anti-Semitic content we see on the platforms. We also train their trust and safety teams on how to recognize anti-Semitism. And even with some of the recent policy changes that we might have seen in the news, that some companies are embarking on, whether it be X from a year ago now, and Meta even recently, we are still actively ensuring that anti-Semitism is clearly prohibited within the platform's policies. And most platforms, actually, they have those prohibitions in place. I'm actually often quite surprised when I go to YouTube or TikTok or X even, or Meta, and I read their policies with regards to anti-Semitism on our issues. They're actually quite strong. One can't deny the Holocaust. One can't make harmful stereotypes about Jews. In the case of Meta and TikTok, using the word Zionist as a proxy for Jew, that's still not allowed. And that was a decision that AJC was involved in. The issue is with enforcement. So when you see anti-Semitic content on these platforms, the policies aren't being enforced. That's really the issue that we're dealing with today, and why so many Americans are seeing anti-Semitism. And we've seen a shift, and this is something that we're actively working on now, that's increasingly relying on human users to report the anti-Semitism they see, and less of that automatic filtering. And that's actually the real issue that we have to change, because we know from our data that most Americans and most US Jews do not report anti-Semitism that they see online. They don't think anything will be done. They don't know how to. They don't think it might be serious enough, but they're not reporting. And so we can't rely on human users, which is something we're working on now, to how do we make it easier for Jewish users and all users to report anti-Semitism on the platform. And the last piece, Julie, we have to, and you know this very well, this is not going to be just up to the tech companies to make these changes. It's not going to be up to Jewish users or allies of the Jewish community to report the anti-Semitism they see. We really do need Congress. We need Congress to make serious reforms to existing laws on the books that will keep these companies accountable if their platforms are spreading anti-Semitism, are spreading hate. And that's the biggest thing that actually AJC is calling for right now in our action alert, is calling on Congress to make these changes.
Thanks so much, Holly. And I want to add, before turning back to Laura with another question, that it's not just online in social media platforms that Jewish Americans aren't reporting anti-Semitic incidents or content. It's really across the board. We hear it from the Department of Justice for their FBI hate crimes report. We hear it from Department of Education for Title VI Civil Rights Act complaints. It's really sort of an issue endemic within our community that I think is hopefully starting to shift. And maybe this is a question that we'll tackle in our next State of Anti-Semitism in America report. But I want to sort of underline it, because for everyone out there who's listening and watching, if you're seeing it, say it to whatever the appropriate authority is. Laura, I want to turn to you and ask you something close to your sort of Center for Jewish Life heart. We asked questions about the Jewish connection to Israel. Holly alluded to that earlier. We asked questions about affiliation to the Jewish community, all with this recognition that 10/7 has really changed everything for so many Jews. What did we learn?
Yeah, so this is really, really important. And I'm going to explain why it's so important. But the headline is, we cannot understand this moment without understanding the deep, deep connection that American Jews have with Israel. So we asked American Jews, when they think about what being Jewish means to them, how important is caring about Israel? And 81% of American Jews said that it was very or somewhat important. And 51% of that said it was very important. So I want to pause for a minute and underscore that. 4 out of 5 American Jews say that caring about Israel is important to what being Jewish means to them. I want to tell you that our statistic does not stand alone. This number has been found and repeated in so many surveys that AJC has done, that the Pew Research Center has done of the American Jewish community. It is critical that our partners, that American society understand that 4 out of 5 American Jews are connected to Israel in powerful ways. I also want to note that 85% of American Jews, so an even higher number, said that the statement Israel has no right to exist is anti-Semitic. This is really, really important information. Over the past few years, with a huge increase after October 7th, we often hear people say, I'm not anti-Semitic, I just hate Zionists. These statistics show that a very large percentage of American Jews hold Zionist ideas. They see caring about Israel as important to their Jewish identity, and they think that denying Israel's right to exist is anti-Semitic. What is being a Zionist? It's saying Israel has a right to exist. So when people say things like Zionists are not welcome here, or even more frighteningly, and we've actually heard this a lot since October 7th, Zionists should die, we have to understand that the overlap between Zionists and Jews is so large that essentially those statements are saying Jews are not welcome here or Jews deserve to die. I want to underscore that we actually, this is another really good data point on the positive side, to Holly's point of let's emphasize some positive things. We have widespread agreement in America among the general American population that saying that Israel has no right to exist is anti-Semitic. In fact, the general population of America agrees with the Jewish community. They too said that 85% of them said that the statement Israel has no right to exist is anti-Semitic. So we really need this very large majority of Americans to stand up in this moment. We need to marginalize the very loud voices who are calling for exclusion and even for violence against Zionists, because way too often that word Zionist simply means Jew. I also just want to say, with my educator hat on, that any education about anti-Semitism, and we at AJC always do this, we have to include the unpacking of the Jewish connection to Israel. And that connection is very, very deep and very powerful. And it includes history, it includes religion, it includes culture, it includes the fact that the 2 largest Jewish communities in the world are in the United States and in Israel. And so many Jews have family members, at least distant cousins, or much closer family members. My son is there now, who live in Israel. And lastly, it has to incorporate the sense of safety that Jews need after millennia of being expelled, of being subjected to violence and murder, the sense of safety that Jews have knowing that the state of Israel exists. So I want to really just emphasize that so strongly, that this data supports a path forward for Americans to stand up, the vast majority of Americans to stand up in this moment, and also to inform the way we talk about anti-Semitism.
So helpful, and thank you for ending on a positive note. Claire, do we have questions from the audience?
We do. The first question is from Jessica Sharon, who's asking, is there a clear definition of anti-Semitism in the report? Also, were people given the opportunity to describe their personal experiences with anti-Semitism?
I'll take it to start. The answer is yes to both. And on the latter piece, the personal experiences is really what captivates. It's the story, it's the people behind those numbers. And so yes, AJC, we do have a collection of verbatim quotes of people describing what they went through. We know their age, we know the gender they identified with, and we also know where they live in the census regions in the US. And so we can begin to have a more rich story through these quotes, and we'll be releasing some of those quotes in the coming weeks. We also do define anti-Semitism in our US adult survey. So we actually do not define anti-Semitism for American Jews. We know there are some different definitions out there, but we allow American Jews to self-define and interpret their own experiences. For US adults, though, the very first question that we start our survey with, we've done this every year for the last 5 years since we've started conducting this research with the American general public, is how familiar are you with the term anti-Semitism? The number this year was about 7 in 10 Americans said that they were familiar with it. And simply put, about 30% of Americans really aren't familiar with the term. In the second question, we say, how much of a problem, if at all, do you think anti-Semitism, comma, which is a hostility or prejudice toward Jewish people, comma, is in the United States today? So it's a very simple definition. It's focused on hostility, on prejudice. We did not have room for an entire International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, but we do define it in the survey, and everyone will still take the survey, even if they really weren't familiar with the opening question.
Many on Zoom are asking, there are many different surveys and statistics from other organizations on anti-Semitism. Laura, you mentioned some. How does the AJC survey differ from those? Laura, Holly, go ahead.
Holly, I'm going to defer to you first.
I'll start and then you can fill in.
Okay.
One thing that's important is we've been collecting this same kind of style, the same style of report. I'm looking at American Jews, looking at the US population in comparison with each other since 2020. Now, in the last couple of years, there have been even more studies looking at both these groups together. You know, we might have started it 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and more might be coming out. What's really unique about our report is, one, this change over time, asking these same questions. So we are the only ones that can really look back 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023 and see this change. That's really the first thing. The second thing is, you know, other surveys are actually quite important if they're done well. I will say this very clearly. There are so many polls out there that are not methodologically sound that we're seeing. So really do check the methodology report, see the numbers that are taking the survey. I've seen surveys come out with N equals 200 people, right? That's not representative of what's happening. So really be careful on that piece. But there are rich surveys, methodologically sound surveys that are coming out that actually support our data. They support what we're doing also. So when we look at other organizations or other research firms that are looking at anti-Semitic attitudes, for instance, we are seeing trends that there are more young Americans today that hold anti-Semitic attitudes than in the last 4 decades. Well, that translates very easily to our report, which shows that Americans, the young Americans, they don't really know what anti-Semitism is compared to their older counterparts. They're not as familiar that it's increased or that it's a problem. And young Jews are experiencing more anti-Semitism. So we see that connection. We also have surveys on incidents, where incidents are happening, anti-Semitic incidents. That also helps us because we can look and disaggregate our own data by census region, by denomination, and see some of these patterns. So we do like to use these data sets together as we continue to keep our trend of publishing this content each year.
So I think Holly pretty much covered it. I'll just add one thing, which is I think that it is actually very important to see that multiple responsible outlets are coming up with similar data points. For example, as I just said about the Jewish connection to Israel. There are so many organizations who have done reputable, very, very careful survey work and have come up with that statistic of about 80, 81, 83, something in that %. And that just adds enormous gravitas to the statistic. And as Holly said, I mean, that's what I was going to talk about, the fact that we have this intersection of young Jews are more anti-Semitic, young Americans are more anti-Semitic, and young Jews are suffering more from anti-Semitism. That intersection is so important. Responsible studies, I don't think that we should, curtail them. I think that the more data that we have, the better that we can address the issues that face us.
Thank you. Our next question is from Jordan Greenblatt, who's asking, what happens with these findings? For example, you shared that you work with the Small Business Administration on formulating the questions. Do you share these, for example, with leaders at the Department of Education or elsewhere? And it's a two-part question. Are there any legislative actions that we should be recommending to address the growth of anti-Semitism on campus? Laura, we'll start with you.
Sure. So we at the Center of Education for Education Advocacy share this data very widely. We have a number of programs scheduled in the coming weeks for our partners in the university space, are the presidents that we work closely with. Many of you may know that we had a summit for university presidents back in September. We had almost 80 presidents there from all over the country. Many of the universities that have struggled the most with anti-Semitism, their presidents were right there with us to learn and to collaborate with one another. So we are sharing with presidents and senior leadership teams. We are sharing with the alumni of our Project Interchange educational delegations. Project Interchange is AJC's educational travel to Israel division. We take university presidents, presidents, university deans every summer to Israel. We also take heads of independent schools to Israel every summer. So we have a briefing scheduled that we are scheduling as well for those independent school leaders, independent heads of school, faculty members. We also have briefings scheduled for parents who we know can make change in school systems and in school spaces because of their connections that they have to administrators, to superintendents, et cetera. So we have a lot of educational work ahead. We meet with trustees. There are so many bodies in the education world that we will be meeting with in order to brief them on this data in the coming weeks. It's so critical for them to understand. It will inform their strategy going forward. And it also gives the data underpinning for the requests and strategies that we're suggesting for them to employ.
I'll just add one small piece to Laura's remarks. When we think about the various sectors of society that AJC has in our call to action against anti-Semitism in America, when we have this whole of society approach, when we think of the sectors that must be involved, whether it's the media, whether it's social media companies, whether it's the educational institutions, it's government, it's law enforcement, it's influencers, celebrities, we will cater all of our data points into presentations fit for those sectors. What does the media need to know about what we just found? What do the social media companies need to know about how American Jews are experiencing anti-Semitism on their platform? What does law enforcement need to know? About 66% of American Jews say that law enforcement is effective in responding to anti-Semitism, but what about the others who might not? So we will target each of these audiences with this data over the next year. That's something I should also mention. This is a year-long project of ensuring that we're getting this information into the right hands. I'll speak 1 second on the legislative piece. That was the second part of the question on legislation. One thing that the data does show is that 30% of Americans really aren't familiar, again, with the term anti-Semitism. They've either never heard the term before or they've heard it but still don't know what it means. 41% of young Americans aren't familiar with anti-Semitism. And so, for instance, when the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act was reintroduced into Congress earlier this week, this is an act that looks at defining anti-Semitism, looks at the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. We were able to be present at this reintroduction because of knowing this data, that so many Americans actually aren't familiar with anti-Semitism and this need to define it before we can even fight it. And we're doing similar work with Congress on reforming Section 230, the Communications Decency Act, to ensure that the companies that so many American Jews feel anti-Semitism on, who are physically unsafe from the anti-Semitic incidents that they face, there can be a recourse and reform there as well.
I also wanted to add a couple
go
things
ahead.
about, I wanted to add a couple things about legislation or policy in the education sector. And then I'd love to have Julie weigh in because this is really her expertise.
You guys are doing great.
But you would do even better. AJC Center for Education Advocacy really looks at education in its entirety, sort of like as a K through 12 and a higher education trajectory. It's really important to think about it as one long trajectory. And we know that the education that our kids are receiving in K through 12 schools impacts the students they're going to become in university. It also impacts the faculty members in university because they too went through K through 12 schools. So we're looking at very, very carefully and doing work on liberated ethnic studies, for example, which are curricula that are often marginalizing of Jewish identity and outright hostile toward the state of Israel, advancing even conspiracy theories about the state of Israel. Those liberated ethnic studies curricula are being advanced in various states, and we're doing work on that very, very closely. And we're also just eager to see, and maybe Julie can weigh in a little on this, on how Title VI law is going to continue to develop as a tool to address anti-Semitism, both in the K through 12 space and on campus. And lastly, I just want to make a note, because this is something that's really important to me, about Holocaust education. So we have a really interesting data point in the survey. Our survey found that 94% of American Jews and 84% of the general public said that students need to learn about more than just the Holocaust to better understand anti-Semitism and the Jewish people. And I think that's really, really important because I think in the past we kind of said, oh, as long as there's a Holocaust education law in a particular state, we're covered. But that's not the case, right? Anti-Semitism and the Jewish people are about much more than the Holocaust, even as the Holocaust is critical to educate about. So I wanted to make note of that. That's really important data point as well. And Julie, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
I'll try to be as concise as possible. I want to make sure that we don't leave out the important work that we're doing with the administration, not just, the various departments with whom we have a relationship like the SBA, where we have a partnership, but also more broadly, recognizing that this administration is still sort of information, that a lot of the traditional partners that we would go to, the secretaries of various agencies, are still going through their confirmation processes. So we've offered our survey to the partners who, the career sort of civil servants, and those in who have gone through their confirmation process. We've offered to the new interagency task force being run out of the Department of Justice, led by Leo Terrell, to make sure that everyone in the administration who's working on these issues is aware of the content that we're providing, and also trying to be a little bit creative about who else we're reaching. So those in the Washington think tank establishment, as well as, of course, partners in Congress, the Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Antisemitism, et cetera. Holly mentioned how our data helps to support legislation like the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. One other piece of, I don't want to even just limit it to legislation, but one other really important sort of legislative initiative that AJC has been on the forefront of for many years is trying to improve reporting of hate crimes. And I got on my soapbox a little bit ago, talking about how Jews don't report. But reporting is really a problem across the board in our country. Besides victims of hate and anti-Semitism not reporting, law enforcement doesn't do a good job of reporting to the FBI for the annual hate crimes report because it's voluntary. So there's vast underreporting across the board, and we really don't have a great sense of what the state of hate looks like in America. And it's frankly sort of a difficult political issue. One of the things that we've found through our State of Anti-Semitism in America reports is that 9 in 10 Americans, not just Jewish Americans, all Americans, say, yes, hate incidents should be reported to a national database. So to be able to go to those who might be resistant to enforcement of this kind of reporting and being able to say 9 in 10 Americans want this, 9 in 10 Americans don't agree on anything, but they agree on this need to report. So to be able to provide them with that kind of information to back our ask is really, really critical. In 2 seconds, Laura, because you mentioned Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is basically the greatest protectorate of Jewish Americans in the legal systems, in the Civil Rights Code, because it deals with issues of shared ancestry. And it's been primarily the vehicle the Department of Education and others have used to look at incidents related to discrimination or harassment of Jews and say, yes or no, this counts. This is an issue. And one of the things that I think is sort of exciting in this new administration is that the president's executive order on combating anti-Semitism really expanded that legal universe and called on agencies to look at Title VI, yes, but also to examine all the legal authorities available to them, distinct to their agency, distinct to that department, or available across the board to the government, to look at how they can be better addressing anti-Semitism or discrimination, prejudice against Jews. So yes, Title VI, but Title VI plus in this new era. And all of this data will help us not only advance those conversations and make people more sensitive, but also strengthen the argument for why these types of remedies and why, whether it's legal action or legislative action, is so vital and necessary.
And I'll just sneak in our very, very last question, ask you all to be very brief. We're getting a lot of questions about action. What can those of us on Zoom actually do? We now have the data to back up how we feel. How can we take action? In just 30 seconds each.
So I'm going to say something that I've said very many times since October 7th. I love the Book of Esther. Esther was a diaspora Jew in a place of power. I'm sure that not everyone on this call is Jewish, I'm sure. But whether you're Jewish or non-Jewish, every one of us has a palace. Every one of us has a place where we can make change, where we have influence, where we have access to decision makers. We have the data. Our website has action plans for educational spaces and for many other spaces as well. We need to use the influence that we have. We need to use the change makers that we know to get this data into the right hands and to get the solutions into the right hands. And every person should be thinking about, who do I know? Who can I talk to? How can I stand up in this moment?
Claire, we almost just end on that. I feel very similarly as Laura, that the more people that can say something, the better. The more that we can break down the echo chambers and the polarization that we've seen in our country over the last 5 years, the more that we can rebuild trust. Our data does show that, you know, people who know Jews are actually more likely to report anti-Semitism, to know it's a problem, to say that it's increased. So we can increase these cooperations with other communities. That can happen now, and there's a real hunger and need for that.
I'll use this opportunity to give a little plug to AJC's Take Action page. If you go to ajc.org/takeaction, there are always a multitude of action items that you can take simply by putting in your name, your address. It'll populate, whether it's a petition or an email that'll go directly to your members of Congress or state and local government, expressing your viewpoint. They're very simple. They take approximately 30 seconds. And then really critically, once you've taken action, it'll allow you to share it on the social media platform of your choice so that you can empower your friends, your family members to also do the same thing. We have a particular action item that we've created just in response to the data that we've learned from our State of Anti-Semitism in America report related to all of the really shocking statistics that we've learned about perceptions of anti-Semitism on social media. So please, after we close here, go to ajc.org/takeaction, do the action, share it with your friends and family. In this moment where I think a lot of us feel sort of this hopeless, like, what do I do? What do I do? This is a really easy way to sort of get it done and feel like you've done something for the Jewish people in this moment. And with that, I want to thank Holly, I want to thank Laura, and really I want to thank everyone who's tuned in today for taking this opportunity to learn more and to be a part of the AJC advocacy community.
Thank you all for today's important and timely conversation, and thank you to our global audience for tuning in today. Be sure to stay engaged in AJC's essential work combating anti-Semitism. You can access the full report, important resources, and other ways to take action at ajc.org/antisemitism report 2024. Thank you again, and goodbye.